The moment I signed that contract, watching my Aunt Seraphina's trembling hand scratch her signature across the paper that transferred her entire empire to me for $1, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Not joy, not even satisfaction. Just the quiet, profound relief of a war finally won. Her face had aged a decade in that single evening, every wrinkle deepening as she realized she had lost everything. Her son Julian stood frozen behind her. Fists clenched so tight his knuckles had turned white, but my security team made sure he stayed exactly where he was. This was the woman who had raised me after my parents died. The woman who was supposed to protect me, love me. Instead, she had spent 15 years treating me like I was nothing more than a servant in designer clothes. And now she sat in my penthouse in my building, signing away the Blackwood name to the niece she had tried so hard to destroy. But before you judge me, before you think this story is just about revenge, let me ask you something. What would you do if the person who was supposed to love you spent years tearing you down, only to discover you had become everything they feared? If you want to hear how I went from being the family disappointment to owning the very ground my aunt walked on, hit that like button and subscribe, because this story gets so much better. Drop a comment and tell me what you would have done in my situation. Now let me take you back to where it all started. I was 7 years old when my parents died in a car accident on the Pacific Coast Highway. It was a Sunday afternoon in late September, one of those perfect California days when the sun turns everything golden and the ocean sparkles like it's been sprinkled with diamonds. We had spent the day at the beach, my father teaching me to body surf, while my mother laughed from her spot on the blanket, her dark hair whipping in the wind. I can still remember the taste of salt on my lips, the feeling of my father's strong hands catching me as a wave knocked me over, the sound of my mother calling us back for sandwiches she had packed that morning. They died on the drive home. A drunk driver crossed the center line on a blind curve. I was told it was instantaneous, that they didn't suffer. I was also told I was lucky to have survived with just a broken arm and some bruises. Lucky. That was the word the social worker used when she sat across from me in the hospital room, her face arranged in practiced sympathy. Lucky to be alive. Lucky to have family willing to take me in. At 7 years old, sitting in a hospital bed wearing a cast covered in nurses' signatures, having just learned that my parents were never coming back. Lucky was not a word that held any meaning. 2 weeks later, I was on a plane to New York with a social worker I had met once before, carrying everything I owned in a single suitcase, covered in stickers from places my family had visited. Disneyland, the San Diego Zoo, Yosemite. Each sticker was a memory I was leaving behind, a life that had been ripped away in the span of a heartbeat. The first time I saw the Pinnacle, I thought it looked like something from a fairy tale. The kind of building where princesses lived in towers, waiting to be rescued. The luxury high-rise in Manhattan stretched so impossibly high into the November sky that I had to crane my neck all the way back to see the top, my breath making little clouds in the cold air. I had never experienced a real winter before, coming from Southern California, where winter meant you might need a light jacket. The New York cold bit through my thin coat, the one my mother had bought me just a month before the accident, never imagining I would need something heavier. The lobby was all polished marble and gleaming gold, with massive chandeliers that hung from the vaulted ceiling like frozen waterfalls, each crystal catching and refracting the light into 1,000 tiny rainbows. There were leather couches arranged in intimate groupings, fresh flower arrangements that were taller than I was, and a doorman in a uniform with actual gold buttons who tipped his hat to the residents as they passed. I had never seen anything so beautiful or so cold. It felt more like a museum than a home, a place where you weren't supposed to touch anything or make noise or simply exist as a normal child. Seraphina met me in that lobby, and I remember thinking she looked exactly like the evil stepmother in the Disney movies my mom and I used to watch together on rainy days. She wore a black dress that probably cost more than my parents' monthly mortgage. Her blonde hair pulled back so tightly it seemed to pull at the corners of her eyes. Her makeup applied with the precision of someone who viewed their face as a project, rather than a part of themselves. She was beautiful in the way that expensive things are beautiful, polished and perfect, and utterly untouchable. She looked down at me with eyes the color of ice, and I saw no warmth there, no grief for her dead brother, no compassion for the traumatized child standing before her, just a cold, calculating assessment of the burden she had just inherited, like I was a package that had been delivered to the wrong address. She didn't hug me, she didn't kneel down to my level or offer any comfort to a little girl who had just lost everything that mattered. She didn't even touch my shoulder or take my hand. Instead, she looked at the social worker and said, "You can leave her things with the doorman. I'll have someone bring them up." Then she turned those ice-chip eyes to me and delivered the first of many lessons about my place in her world. "You will address me as Aunt Serafina, never just Aunt, and certainly never anything more familiar. You will not embarrass me in front of my friends or colleagues. You will learn to conduct yourself appropriately in social situations, which means you will be quiet unless spoken to. Your parents may have lived like middle-class nobodies in some beach town, but you are a Blackwood now, at least in name, and you will learn to act like it, or you will make your life here very difficult." I nodded because I didn't know what else to do, too numb with grief to fully process what kind of life I was walking into, too young to understand that this woman who shared blood with my beloved father had none of his kindness or warmth. My arm throbbed in its cast. My entire body ached from the accident. I wanted my mom. I wanted my dad. I wanted to wake up and discover this was all a nightmare. Instead, I stood in that cold, beautiful lobby and felt the first cracks forming in my heart. Julian stood behind his mother like a shadow, and when Serafina turned to lead us to the elevator, he stepped closer to me. At 10 years old, he was already learning to be cruel in the casual, thoughtless way that privileged children often are. He looked at my discount store clothes, my scuffed sneakers, my suitcase with its cheerful stickers, and a smirk formed on his face that I would come to know very, very well over the next 15 years. "Don't touch anything," he whispered as we waited for the elevator. "Everything here costs more than your whole house probably did. Mom says we have to take you in because it would look bad if we didn't, but that doesn't mean you belong here." He would spend the next 15 years making sure I never forgot that I was the charity case, the poor relation who only existed in their world because blood relation and social propriety demanded it. He would spend those years reminding me in 1,000 large and small ways that I was less than unwanted, a burden they bore with martyred patience. The first few years were the hardest, though they would all be hard in different ways. I wasn't allowed to call Serafina mom or mother. The first time I tried reaching for any kind of maternal connection in my grief, she had turned to me with such cold fury that I actually took a step backward. "I am not your mother," she said, her voice sharp enough to cut. "Your mother is dead. I am your aunt, and you will address me with the appropriate respect and distance." I never made that mistake again. I was given a room that was barely bigger than a closet with a single window that looked out onto the narrow gap between buildings, a view of brick wall and other people's windows. The room had a twin bed with a thin mattress, a small dresser with 3 drawers, and a desk so small I could barely fit a textbook and notebook on it at the same time. There was no decoration, no warmth, nothing to make it feel like a child's room. Meanwhile, Julian's suite took up nearly a quarter of their floor. He had a bedroom with a king-sized bed, a sitting area with a television and gaming systems, his own bathroom with a rainfall shower, and a walk-in closet bigger than my entire room. I was enrolled in the same elite private school as Julian Ashworth Academy, where tuition cost more per year than my parents had earned in 6 months. But while Julian was driven there every morning in a private town car with heated leather seats, I was given a Metro card and directions to the nearest subway station. I was 8 years old the first time I navigated the New York subway system alone, clutching a crumpled map and trying not to cry as crowds of strangers rushed past me. Serafina said it would build character and teach me independence. What it really built was bone-deep resilience and a profound understanding of how the other half lived, the half that didn't have drivers and doormen and trust funds. Every day after school, while Julian went to tennis lessons at an exclusive club or hung out with his wealthy friends at their parents' penthouses and country estates, I came home to a list of chores waiting on the kitchen counter. I was responsible for my own laundry, which meant trips to the building's basement laundry room with quarters I scrounged from couch cushions. I made my own meals from whatever ingredients Serafina deemed I was allowed to use, usually the cheap generic brands she kept in a separate cabinet labeled for my use. I cleaned my own room, of course, but also was expected to help with other household tasks, the kinds of things that Serafina's hired help apparently shouldn't have to bother with. But the worst part was the dinner parties. Serafina hosted these elaborate affairs, several times a month events, where New York's elite gathered to see and be seen, to network and gossip and show off their wealth. On those nights, I would watch from my room as luxury cars pulled up to the building, as women in designer gowns, and men in expensive suits filed into our home, their laughter echoing through halls I wasn't welcome to walk through. I would peek through my door, which I kept open just a crack, and see the dining room table loaded with elaborate dishes prepared by professional caterers. See the champagne flowing, hear the clink of crystal glasses, and the murmur of important conversations about art and business and politics. I was never invited to these gatherings. The official explanation when anyone asked was that I was shy or studying or not feeling well. The truth was that Serafina didn't want me there. She didn't want to explain to her high society friends why the daughter of her middle-class brother was living with her. Didn't want to see the pity or judgment in their eyes. Didn't want to risk me saying or doing something that would reflect poorly on her carefully curated image. So on those nights, I ate alone in the kitchen after everyone had finished after the guests had left, and the caterers had packed up most of their supplies. I would sit at the small breakfast table picking at whatever leftovers they had left behind. Beautifully prepared food, gone cold and slightly congealed, and try not to think about the dinners at my parents' house. My mom had been a wonderful cook, not fancy but full of love, and our dinner table had been a place of warmth and laughter and belonging. In Serafina's kitchen, eating scraps like a stray dog, allowed to stay only out of obligation, I felt the full weight of everything I had lost. But I was smart. Even as a child, even through the fog of grief and loneliness, I understood that education was my only way out of this situation. My father had been an engineer, my mother a teacher, and they had both instilled in me a love of learning and a belief that knowledge was a kind of power that no one could take away from you. So I threw myself into my studies with a ferocity that surprised my teachers at Ashworth Academy, where most students coasted on their parents' reputations and donations. I devoured books, everything I could get my hands on. I stayed late at the school library partly because I genuinely loved learning and partly because it meant I didn't have to go back to that cold apartment and that colder woman. I read classic literature and contemporary fiction books on science and history and philosophy. I taught myself about finance and investing, reading the Wall Street Journal in the library, and taking notes on companies and market trends. I joined the debate team, the math club, the Junior Investment Society. I graduated at the top of my class valedictorian with a GPA that was literally perfect. When it came time for college, I had acceptance letters from every Ivy League school I applied to, along with offers from Stanford, MIT, and a dozen other prestigious universities. Most came with generous financial aid packages, because my parents' estate, which Serafina controlled as my guardian, appeared modest on paper. But Serafina made it very clear she wouldn't be contributing a single dollar to my education. "Your parents left you a small inheritance," she said over dinner one night during my senior year. Julian smirking beside her. "Barely enough for community college if you're careful. You should be grateful they were at least responsible enough to leave you that. I would suggest you look into state schools and student loans. Ashworth has prepared you well enough that you could probably get a scholarship somewhere less prestigious." She delivered this news with such casual cruelty, knowing that I had worked harder than any other student at Ashworth, knowing that I had earned my place at the top universities. But she wanted to keep me small, keep me limited, keep me in my place. What she didn't know, what she had made sure I understood I wasn't entitled to know, was that my parents had actually left me quite a bit more than she was admitting. The truth came from Richard Morrison, my father's lawyer, and one of his closest friends from college. Richard had been at my parents' funeral, a kind man in his 50s, with gray at his temples and sadness in his eyes. He had pressed his business card into my small hand and whispered, "If you ever need anything at all, you call me." I had kept that card like a talisman, storing it in the bottom of my desk drawer. Richard had maintained contact with me over the years, always carefully, always in ways that Serafina wouldn't notice. A birthday card with a $20 bill inside. A letter congratulating me on making honor roll. Little reminders that someone in the world still cared about me, still remembered that I was more than just an obligation. When I turned 17, he asked me to meet him at a coffee shop near my school, and over hot chocolate he told me the truth. My parents had been smart with money. They had invested wisely, started college funds and retirement accounts, bought good life insurance policies. The accounts were held in trust, managed by Richard as trustee until I turned 18. Serafina had access to a small stipend for my care, which she rarely used on me, but the bulk of the estate was protected from her. When I turned 18 and gained legal access to those funds, I would have nearly $200,000. It wasn't a fortune by Blackwood standards, not enough to compete with trust fund babies like Julian, but it was a start. More importantly, it was mine, earned by my parents' hard work and careful planning, protected by their foresight and Richard's integrity. "Your father made me promise that I would make sure you got this," Richard said, sliding the trust documents across the table. "He wanted you to have the freedom to make your own choices, to not be beholden to anyone. I think he knew somehow what kind of situation you might end up in with his sister." I cried in that coffee shop, tears streaming down my face, while Richard patted my hand awkwardly. They weren't tears of grief, though I still grieved my parents every single day. They were tears of relief and gratitude and the first stirring of something that felt almost like hope. I had a way out. I had options. I had the chance to build something that was entirely my own. I went to Columbia on a full academic scholarship that covered tuition and fees. I worked 3 jobs to cover living expenses: waitressing at a diner near campus, tutoring rich kids in math and economics, and doing data entry for a professor's research project. I refused to touch my inheritance for anything except strategic investment opportunities. That money was seed capital for my future, and I was going to make every dollar count. I studied finance and business with the intensity of someone who knew that knowledge was the key to freedom. I spent every spare moment learning how money worked, how to make it grow, how to turn capital into empire. While my classmates were out partying at frat houses and networking at country club events I wasn't invited to, I was analyzing stock reports and real estate trends, studying the patterns of wealth creation and market movements. I slept 4 hours a night and lived on coffee and determination, and a burning need to prove that I was worth something, that I could be someone, that the little girl eating cold leftovers in that kitchen had been destined for more. During my sophomore year, I made my first major move. One of my friends from computer science class was a brilliant programmer named Sarah Chen, a second-generation immigrant whose parents ran a dry cleaning business in Queens. Sarah had developed a revolutionary property management software that used artificial intelligence to optimize building operations, predict maintenance issues, and streamline tenant communications. She had the technology and the vision, but she needed capital to scale from a prototype to a viable business. We spent hours in the library, Sarah showing me the code and the business model, me running financial projections and market analysis. The startup landscape was shifting, tech was exploding, and I could see that property management was ready for disruption. I could also see that Sarah was brilliant and driven and exactly the kind of person who would succeed if given the chance. So I took $100,000, half of my inheritance, and invested it in Sarah's company for 30% equity. My roommates thought I was insane. Richard, when I told him, was concerned that I was risking too much too fast. Even Sarah was shocked that I would bet so heavily on an unproven startup. But I had done the research, I trusted my analysis, and more than that, I trusted Sarah. It was the first time I had ever made a major decision based entirely on my own judgment, with no one to answer to, and nothing to fall back on if I failed. That startup is now worth $40 million, and I still own my full 30% stake, which means my $100,000 investment is now worth $12 million. But more valuable than the money was what I learned from that experience. Trust your instincts, bet on talented people, and don't be afraid to take calculated risks. I graduated summa cum laude from Columbia at 21, my diploma marking me as not just successful, but exceptional. I had job offers from Goldman Sachs, Morgan Stanley, and several other prestigious firms. They offered 6-figure starting salaries, clear paths to partnership, all of the trappings of success that someone from my background was supposed to be grateful for. I turned them all down. Instead, I took my remaining $100,000 and dove into real estate investment. I started small hunting for distressed properties in Brooklyn neighborhoods that were just beginning to gentrify, places where I could see the potential that others were missing. I bought my first property, a rundown brownstone that needed everything from new plumbing to a new roof, for $80,000. I spent 3 months learning to do basic renovation work myself, working alongside contractors during the day and studying building codes and permit processes at night. I sold that brownstone for $160,000 6 months later. I took that profit and immediately reinvested it, buying 2 more properties this time. Then 4, then 8. I developed a system, a formula for identifying undervalued properties, renovating them efficiently, and selling them at exactly the right moment to maximize return. I reinvested every single penny of profit, living in a studio apartment in a questionable neighborhood, eating ramen most nights, wearing the same rotation of professional clothes I had bought on clearance. Within 3 years, I had a real estate portfolio worth over $5 million. I had developed relationships with contractors, mortgage brokers, real estate attorneys, and property inspectors. I had learned every aspect of the business from the ground up, made mistakes, and learned from them, built a reputation for being reliable, professional, and ruthlessly efficient. By the time I was 27, I had quietly become one of the most successful young real estate investors in New York, with a portfolio that included residential properties, small commercial buildings, and several development projects. I had an office in a modest building in Midtown, a small team of employees, and a business that generated consistent 7-figure annual profits. But here's the crucial part. I kept a low profile throughout all of this. I used my mother's maiden name, Aria Vance, for all my business dealings, instead of Aria Blackwood. I avoided press coverage, turned down interviews, stayed off social media, and made sure my name never appeared in the business journals that Serafina read religiously. I wanted to build my empire in secret, away from her toxic influence and Julian's jealous interference. More than that, I wanted to reveal my success on my own terms, at the time of my choosing, when the impact would be maximum. To Serafina and Julian, I was still the poor little orphan girl they had graciously taken in all those years ago. I let them believe that. I cultivated that image carefully, protecting it like the valuable asset it was. I would show up for mandatory family dinners a few times a year, usually major holidays, when my absence would be too obvious. I wore modest clothes from department stores, drove a 10-year-old Honda, carried a worn purse, and maintained the appearance of someone who was doing fine, but nothing special. Someone who had landed a decent middle management job somewhere and was grateful for the opportunity. At those dinners held in the same apartment where I had been so miserable, I would sit quietly at the far end of the table while Julian held court, bragging about his mediocre ventures in Blackwood Industries. He was a vice president in name, only given the title because of his last name, rather than any actual competence. His projects consistently underperformed, his judgment was questionable at best, and his main skill was taking credit for other people's work. But Serafina doted on him, praising his business acumen and natural leadership abilities, while he smugly described deals that I could see were poorly structured and likely to fail. I would smile and nod, play the role of the supportive cousin, the grateful niece. Serafina would make her little comments, those barbed observations wrapped in false concern that she had perfected over the years. "It's such a shame you never quite found your calling, Aria. I had such high hopes for you despite your unfortunate background." Or, "I'm glad you're managing to support yourself, dear. Not everyone is cut out for real success, and there's no shame in that. We can't all be entrepreneurs like Julian." Each comment was designed to diminish, to remind me of my place, to make sure I stayed small in my own eyes and in the eyes of anyone listening. I would thank her for her concern. In a quiet voice, keep my expression neutral, and leave as soon as it was polite to do so, knowing that every word she spoke was adding fuel to a fire that was slowly building inside me. Every casual cruelty was being catalogued, remembered, stored away for future reference. I wasn't being weak or passive. I was being strategic, because I had learned something important over those years of building my business. The best victories are the ones your enemy never sees coming. The truth was, I didn't need Serafina's approval anymore. I hadn't needed it for years. I didn't need her money, her connections, her validation, or anything else she could offer. I was successful beyond anything she had imagined possible for me. But there was still a part of me, that 7-year-old girl who had lost her parents and desperately wanted to be loved, that kept showing up to those dinners. That kept hoping that maybe, just maybe, one day she would see me as more than an obligation, would express even a moment of pride or affection, would give me some sign that I mattered to her as a person, rather than as a burden she was forced to bear. That hope, stubborn and foolish as it was, died exactly 3 months ago on a Tuesday evening in the lobby of the Pinnacle. I had just closed a deal on a commercial property in Midtown, a $15 million transaction that had taken months to negotiate. I was exhausted but exhilarated, and I had made the mistake of stopping by the Pinnacle on my way home to my own apartment in the West Village. I don't even know why I went there. Maybe some part of me wanted to walk through that lobby one more time as a success, even if no one knew it but me. I was wearing a navy blue suit that had been custom tailored for me by a designer who usually dressed Fortune 500 CEOs. My hair was pulled back in a neat bun, my makeup minimal but polished. I looked every inch the successful businesswoman I had become. But the moment I walked through those doors, I became 7 years old again in Serafina's eyes. She was sitting at the lobby bar with two of her society friends, women whose names were always in the style section of the Times. Julian was there too, nursing what looked like his third whiskey sour, based on the flush in his cheeks. The moment Serafina saw me, her voice cut across the lobby like a knife. "Oh, my, look who's wandering in here. Are you delivering for DoorDash, darling? I didn't order anything, but the doorman might need his lunch." Her friends tittered behind their champagne glasses. A few other residents looked up from their phones, curious about the commotion. I felt heat rise in my cheeks. That familiar shame trying to claw its way up my throat. For a moment, I was transported back to every dinner party I had been excluded from, every time Julian had accidentally spilled something on my school uniform, every microaggression and outright cruelty I had endured in this building. Julian, emboldened by his mother's cruelty and the alcohol in his system, added his own contribution. "Actually, Mom, I think she's here to apply for the cleaning staff position. I heard they're hiring and, it's probably the best she can do." The laughter that followed felt like acid on my skin. But something inside me snapped. Not in the way that leads to tears or shouting. No, it was a cold crystalline break like ice cracking on a frozen lake. I had spent 15 years being grateful, being quiet, being small. I had built an empire in secret, driven by the memory of my parents and a bone-deep need to prove I was worth something. And in that moment, I realized I was done hiding. I didn't respond to their jeers. I walked past them with my head high and went straight to the reception desk, where Harrison, the building manager, was reviewing some paperwork. Harrison was in his late 50s, a consummate professional who had always treated me with more kindness than my own aunt. He looked up as I approached, and his face transformed into a warm smile. "Miss Vance," he said, his voice carrying clearly across the now silent lobby. "Welcome home. I hope the flight from the closing was smooth. Your penthouse has been prepared exactly to your specifications. The designer finished the last touches this morning." I watched Serafina's face from the corner of my eye. The blood had drained from her cheeks, leaving her looking pale and confused. Her champagne glass hovered halfway to her lips, forgotten. "I'm sorry," she said, her voice strangled. "What did you just call her?" I turned slowly, deliberately, to face my aunt. The look on her face was worth every sleepless night, every humiliation, every moment I had spent proving myself. "Oh," I said, my voice calm and clear. "I thought you knew, Aunt Serafina. I didn't just buy the penthouse. I purchased the entire building last week. The sale closed this morning." The silence that followed was absolute. You could have heard a pin drop on the marble floor. I let it stretch, let the weight of what I had just said settle over everyone in that lobby. Then I smiled a small, polite smile that didn't reach my eyes. "So please," I continued, my voice sweet as honey and twice as dangerous, "do be careful with your drinks. I'd hate for you to stain my floors." Serafina's champagne glass slipped from her fingers and shattered on the marble. The sound was like a gunshot in the silence. Julian's face had gone from flushed to purple with rage. His mother's friends were staring at me with a mixture of shock and something that might have been respect. I didn't wait for a response. I turned back to Harrison, who was trying very hard not to smile, and said, "I'll be heading up now. Please have the building report sent to my office tomorrow morning." "Of course, Miss Vance," he replied, handing me a keycard. "And congratulations again on the acquisition." As I walked toward the private elevator that would take me to the penthouse, the one that had always been reserved for the building's previous owner, I heard Serafina hiss at Julian, her voice low but venomous enough to carry. "You just made a very powerful enemy, you stupid girl." I stopped my hand on the elevator button and looked back one last time. "No, Aunt Serafina," I said quietly. "You made an enemy 15 years ago. I just became powerful enough to do something about it." The elevator doors closed on her shocked face, and as I rode up to the penthouse, I felt lighter than I had in years. The war had begun, and I had just fired the first shot. What I didn't know was that Serafina Blackwood didn't get to where she was by accepting defeat gracefully. Over the next few weeks, life in the Pinnacle became a battlefield, and my aunt was determined to make me regret every word I had said in that lobby. It started small. The fire alarm would go off at 3 in the morning, sending all the residents stumbling into the street in their pajamas. The hot water would mysteriously stop working, but only on Serafina's floor. The elevator serving the lower floors would break down repeatedly, causing complaints to flood Harrison's office. It was clearly sabotage, designed to make me look incompetent as the new owner and turn the other residents against me. I knew it was Julian's handiwork. My cousin had never been particularly bright, but he was vindictive and had enough of his mother's money to bribe building staff. I didn't react publicly. Instead, I called David Chen, my lawyer, and one of the few people who knew the full extent of my business dealings. David was a shark in an expensive suit, the son of Taiwanese immigrants who had built his practice from nothing into one of the most respected firms in the city. "They're playing dirty," I told him over coffee in my penthouse. The space was stunning, all floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Central Park, minimalist furniture, and shades of cream and gray. My mother would have loved it. "I need to know who's helping them." David nodded, pulling out his tablet. "I'll have my investigators on it by this afternoon. In the meantime, I suggest we upgrade security, cameras in all common areas, new access controls, the works." Within 48 hours, we had our answer. A maintenance worker named Eddie Caruso had been accepting cash payments from Julian to cause the various malfunctions. We had video evidence of the money changing hands, time-stamped and crystal clear. I could have gone to the police had Julian arrested for criminal mischief and bribery, but that would have been too quick, too clean. Instead, I fired Eddie on the spot with David present to ensure everything was done legally. Then I had a beautifully wrapped box delivered to Serafina's apartment. Inside was a tablet queued up to play the video of Julian handing cash to Eddie. There was a note written in my neat handwriting on cream cardstock. "Childish games don't suit you, Aunt. Try harder." The look on Julian's face when his mother summoned him to her apartment must have been priceless. I know because Harrison, who had quickly become my ally after years of watching Serafina abuse her position in the building, quietly mentioned that he had heard shouting coming from their unit for over an hour. But I had underestimated Serafina. She had spent 30 years building an empire in New York society, and she knew exactly where to strike to hurt me the most. If I had won the first battle, she was about to launch a war that would threaten everything I had built. 2 weeks after the elevator incident, I started noticing a shift in how people treated me at business meetings. There were subtle changes, knowing looks, a coldness that hadn't been there before. It came to a head when Marcus Silverton, the CEO of Silverton Properties, and a key partner in a major development deal I was pursuing, called to cancel our lunch meeting. Then he canceled the deal entirely, pulling his company's $40 million investment from a project that had taken me 6 months to put together. "I'm sorry, Arya," he said over the phone, his voice stiff and uncomfortable. "The board has decided to go in a different direction. We wish you the best of luck." I knew immediately what had happened. Serafina had gotten to him. My aunt was a fixture in New York high society, served on the boards of half a dozen charities, and had connections that ran deep through the city's business community. She had started a whisper campaign, planting seeds of doubt about my character and competence. Over the next few days, I pieced together the rumors through contacts in my network. According to the stories Serafina was spreading, I had only achieved my success by sleeping with older investors. I was new money, classless. Someone who didn't understand the rules of the world we operated in. I was ruthless in business, in a way that was acceptable for men, but scandalous for women. Worst of all, I had betrayed family, and if I could do that, who else would I betray? The damage was real and potentially devastating. I had other deals in the pipeline worth over $70 million combined. If Serafina's campaign was successful, I could lose them all. For the first time since I had confronted her in the lobby, I felt a flutter of real fear. David found me in my office on a Thursday evening, staring out at the city lights, turning over options in my mind. He set down a cup of coffee on my desk and waited for me to speak. "She's good," I finally said. "I'll give her that. She knows exactly how to destroy someone's reputation without leaving fingerprints." "So what do we do?" David asked. "We could sue for defamation, but proving it would be difficult and it would drag out for years." I shook my head. "No, we fight fire with fire. She wants to play in society, fine. Let's play her game." 3 weeks later, Serafina hosted her annual charity gala, the most prestigious event of the fall social season. It was held at the Plaza Hotel, 500 of New York's wealthiest and most influential people, all gathering to write checks and be seen. The gala raised money for childhood literacy, which was ironic considering Serafina had never read a book for pleasure in her life. But it was the crown jewel of her social calendar, the event that cemented her status as a pillar of New York society. When the invitation arrived at my penthouse, heavy cream cardstock with gold embossing, I knew it was a trap. She was daring me to show my face to give her the opportunity to humiliate me in front of everyone who mattered. David advised against going. Most of my team thought I should skip it, but I had learned something important over the years. You can't win a war by hiding. Sometimes you have to walk right into the lion's den and show them you're not afraid. I spent 3 weeks preparing. I hired a stylist who dressed A-list celebrities for red carpet events. I bought a gown that cost more than most people's cars, a stunning floor-length creation in midnight blue that made me look like I had stepped out of old Hollywood. I had my hair and makeup done by artists who normally worked on magazine covers. When I looked in the mirror the night of the gala, I barely recognized myself. I looked powerful, untouchable, every inch the success I had become. The Plaza Ballroom was spectacular, dripping with crystal chandeliers and white orchids. A string quartet played in the corner while servers circulated with champagne and hors d'oeuvres. The room was full of people I recognized from business journals and society pages, all dressed in their finest, all performing the elaborate dance of New York high society. I made my entrance deliberately late, timing it so that most guests were already seated for dinner. The room fell silent as I walked in, heads turning to track my progress across the floor. I could feel eyes on me, hear the whispers starting. I kept my head high, my smile serene, and made my way to my assigned table. Serafina was watching me from the head table, her expression carefully neutral, but her eyes burning with fury. She was wearing a red gown that probably cost a fortune, but looked overdone next to the elegant simplicity of most other guests. Julian sat beside her, looking uncomfortable in a tuxedo that fit him poorly. Dinner was a torturous affair of small talk and forced smiles. I sat next to a hedge fund manager named Robert and his wife Patricia, both of whom were polite but distant. I knew they had heard the rumors. Everyone had. I made pleasant conversation, asked about their children, and didn't mention business once. After dessert, Serafina rose to give her speech. She was a natural performer, all gracious smiles and perfectly timed pauses. She talked about the importance of literacy, about giving back to the community, about the values of family and legacy. Then her eyes found me in the crowd. "Of course," she said, her voice carrying across the silent room. "Legacy is something we must all consider carefully. It's not just about what we leave behind, but how we build our lives with integrity and grace. In today's world, there are so many people who try to rise above their station without understanding the responsibility that comes with true success." She paused, letting that land, and I knew this was it. This was where she would strike, which is why she continued, her smile widening. "I'd like to invite someone very special to share a few words with you tonight. My dear niece, Aria Blackwood, or should I say Aria Vance, has recently joined us in the world of business. I thought it would be wonderful to hear her perspective on building a legacy." The trap was beautifully laid. If I refused, I would look cowardly. If I spoke, she expected me to stumble, to reveal myself as the imposter she had painted me to be. Around me, 500 pairs of eyes watched to see what I would do. I stood smoothing down my gown and walked to the stage. My heart was pounding, but my hands were steady as I took the microphone from Serafina. Her smile was triumphant, already anticipating my failure. I looked out at the sea of faces, found Marcus Silverton sitting near the front, and began to speak. "Thank you, Aunt Serafina, for those kind words about legacy." My voice was clear and strong, carrying to every corner of the ballroom. "You're absolutely right that legacy is something we should all think carefully about. But I've learned that true legacy isn't about what you inherit. It's not about the family name on your birth certificate or the money in your trust fund. It's about what you build with your own hands, your own mind, your own integrity." I paused, letting that sink in, watching Serafina's smile begin to falter. "I've also learned," I continued, "that how you build that legacy matters just as much as what you build. Transparency in business dealings, ethical treatment of partners and employees, making sure that the money you raise for charity actually goes to charity rather than being funneled through shell companies to avoid taxes or worse." The room had gone deathly quiet. What I was implying was clear to everyone, especially Marcus Silverton, whose expression had shifted from polite interest to sharp attention. I was calling out Serafina's methods, the barely legal tactics she used to maintain her empire. I believe in building businesses that lift people up rather than stepping on them to reach the top. I believe in earning respect through actions rather than demanding it through fear. And I believe that real power comes from knowing who you are and refusing to compromise your values, even when it would be easier to just go along with how things have always been done. I looked directly at Serafina. Her face had gone pale, her carefully maintained composure cracking. "Thank you for this opportunity to speak," I said. "And thank you all for supporting childhood literacy. It's a cause very close to my heart since reading was what saved me during some very dark times in my childhood." The applause started slowly, just one or two people then built into a wave that filled the ballroom. Marcus Silverton was on his feet, clapping hard, a broad smile on his face. Others followed his lead until the entire room was standing. I handed the microphone back to Serafina, whose hand trembled as she took it, and walked off the stage with my head high. The rest of the evening was a blur of introductions and business cards pressed into my hand. Marcus cornered me before I could leave, his eyes bright with interest. "That was quite a speech," he said. "Very bold. I think perhaps I was too hasty in pulling out of our development deal. My office will call yours on Monday to discuss reinstating our partnership." I smiled, shaking his hand. "I look forward to it, but the real victory wasn't the business deal. It was watching Serafina's carefully constructed world begin to crumble around her. Over the next few weeks, questions started being asked about her charity's finances. Her board members began requesting audits. Several of her society friends quietly distanced themselves, declining invitations to her events. I had cracked her armor, and she knew it. The war was far from over, but the balance of power had shifted. What Serafina did next, though, was unforgivable. It was the move of someone backed into a corner, desperate and dangerous. And it would lead to the final confrontation that would end this battle once and for all. After the gala, I thought maybe Serafina would regroup, perhaps even accept that she had met her match. I should have known better. A wounded animal is always the most dangerous, and my aunt was cornered watching her empire begin to crack. The attack came on a Tuesday morning. I was in my office reviewing contracts when David burst in without knocking, his face pale and his jaw tight with anger. He threw a tabloid magazine onto my desk, one of those glossy rags that specialized in scandal and speculation. The headline screamed across the cover, "Poor Little Rich Girl, Aria Vance's Dirty Secrets Exposed." Below it were photos, grainy and old but unmistakably me. Pictures from when I was younger, living in my tiny studio apartment in Brooklyn, working double shifts at a diner to make rent while I built my business. There was a photo of me carrying garbage bags out of a building I had bought to flip, wearing old jeans and a t-shirt stained with paint. Another showed me sleeping on a subway, exhausted after a 70-hour work week. The article spun a vicious narrative. It claimed I had fabricated my success, that I was actually broke and living off loans I could never repay. It implied I had been involved in questionable business deals, hinted at romantic entanglements with married investors. Every accomplishment I had earned through blood, sweat, and sleepless nights was twisted into something dirty, something shameful. But the worst part was the direct quotes, clearly from Julian, about how I had always been jealous of their family, how I had turned on Serafina, despite her generosity in raising me. There were details about my childhood that only family would know, weaponized to paint me as ungrateful, calculating, and cold. "This is character assassination," David said, his voice shaking with fury. "We can sue. We will sue. This crosses every line." I stared at the magazine, at the photos of my younger self, working herself to the bone, to escape exactly the kind of life Serafina had wanted to trap me in. And something inside me went cold and hard as diamond. They had made a crucial mistake. They had gone after my character, my reputation, the very foundation of everything I had built. And in doing so, they had given me all the justification I needed to destroy them completely. "No lawsuits," I said quietly. "Not yet, David. I need you to do something for me. Remember those investigations we've been running into Blackwood Industries' finances?" David's eyes lit up with understanding. "The charity fraud, the shell companies, the offshore accounts. Get me everything, every transaction, every questionable deal, every penny that went somewhere it shouldn't have. And I need it yesterday." Over the next 2 weeks, while tabloid vultures circled, and my business phone rang off the hook with reporters looking for comments, David and his team worked around the clock. What they uncovered was damning. Serafina had been using her charity as a personal piggy bank for years, funneling donations through a network of shell companies and offshore accounts. She had embezzled millions, cheated on taxes, and committed securities fraud through some of her business dealings. It was all carefully hidden, but not carefully enough to withstand the scrutiny of determined forensic accountants. Julian wasn't innocent either. We found evidence of him bribing city officials to get permits for Blackwood Industries projects, using company funds to pay for his gambling debts, and even some light money laundering through various club memberships and entertainment expenses. It was enough to send them both to prison for years. It was enough to dismantle the Blackwood Empire entirely. And that's exactly what I intended to do. But I wanted them to know it was coming. I wanted them to feel the terror of watching their world collapse, the same terror I had felt as a 7-year-old orphan being told I would have to live with an aunt who looked at me like I was garbage. So I arranged a meeting. The invitation was simple, delivered by courier to Serafina's apartment. My penthouse, 8 p.m. tonight. Come alone, both of you. This is your only chance to avoid what's coming. They came. Of course they came. When you're drowning, you'll grab onto any lifeline, even if it's made of razor wire. I had set the scene carefully. The lights in my living room were dim, just the glow of the city outside the floor-to-ceiling windows and a single lamp on the coffee table. David was there, standing by the fireplace in his perfectly tailored suit, holding a thick file folder. My head of security, a former FBI agent named Marcus Cole, waited by the door. I sat in an armchair that faced the entrance legs, crossed, wearing a simple black dress that would have looked at home in a boardroom or a funeral. When Harrison escorted them up, Serafina walked in first, her usual confidence wavering at the edges. She was trying to maintain her superiority, chin high, shoulders back, but I could see the fear in her eyes. Julian followed, looking like a cornered rat, his eyes darting around the room as if cataloging exits. "Sit," I said, gesturing to the couch across from me. My voice was calm, almost pleasant, which made it somehow more threatening. They sat, neither spoke. David opened the file folder and began laying documents across the coffee table between us. Bank statements, transfer records, emails, photos of Julian meeting with the city officials we knew he had bribed. A full accounting of every crime, every unethical dealing, every skeleton that had been hiding in the Blackwood closet. I let them look at the papers, watched the color drain from Serafina's face as she realized what she was seeing. When Julian reached out to grab one of the documents, Marcus stepped forward, and my cousin's hand retreated immediately. "Do you know what this is?" I asked conversationally. "This is 15 years of research. This is every mistake you made, every corner you cut, every law you broke. David has already compiled everything into a report for the District Attorney's Office, the IRS, the SEC, and the FBI. We have testimony from former employees. We have digital forensic evidence. We have everything we need to put you both in prison for the next 20 to 30 years. "You wouldn't dare," Serafina whispered, but her voice had no conviction. "Wouldn't I?" I leaned forward. "You spent 15 years making me feel like nothing. You let your son humiliate me, used me as free labor, denied me the love and support a child deserves from family. And when I finally became successful, despite everything you did to prevent it, you tried to destroy my reputation, my business, everything I built with my own hands. You forfeited any mercy the day you sold those photos to that tabloid." Julian found his voice, and predictably it came out as aggression. "You ungrateful bitch. We gave you a home when nobody else wanted you. We raised you. You gave me a room the size of a closet and made me sleep in it for 15 years while you lived in luxury. You didn't raise me, you tolerated me. There's a difference." I stood walking to the windows, looking out at the city that had watched my transformation from victim to victor. When I spoke again, my voice was soft but filled with steel. "However, I'm not a monster despite what you think of me. So I'm going to give you one chance. Just one. You have 2 choices tonight." David pulled out another document, this one bound in leather, official looking and terrifying. "Choice 1. I continued, turning back to face them. "This file goes to the authorities tomorrow morning. You will be arrested, prosecuted to the fullest extent of the law. Your names will be dragged through every newspaper in the country. You'll lose everything, including your freedom. I will make sure of it." Serafina's hands were shaking. Julian looked like he might be sick. "Choice 2, I said, sitting back down, is on that table. It's a transfer of ownership agreement. You will sign over all controlling interest in Blackwood Industries to my company. Every share, every asset, everything. The purchase price is $1. You'll resign from the board, from all social positions, and you'll issue a public statement saying you're stepping back from public life for personal reasons. You'll sell your apartment in this building and move elsewhere. And you'll never ever contact me again." "That's insane," Julian spat. "You can't just take our company." "I can when the alternative is watching you go to prison," I replied calmly. "And just to be clear, this offer expires the moment you walk out that door. You sign tonight, or you take your chances with the legal system. And I promise you, Julian, the legal system is a lot less forgiving than I'm being right now." Serafina was crying, tears ruining her carefully applied makeup. It was the first time I had ever seen her cry. and I felt absolutely nothing. No satisfaction, no pity, just a cold acceptance that this was how it had to end. "You're just like us," she whispered. "Ruthless, cruel. You became everything you claimed to hate." I considered that for a moment, then shook my head. "No, I'm not like you. You hurt people for sport, for convenience, because it made you feel powerful. Everything I've done has been self-defense. You drew first blood 15 years ago when you looked at a grieving 7-year-old girl and decided she wasn't worth loving. You continued to draw blood every day after that. I'm just finally stopping the bleeding." I nodded to David, who laid a pen on top of the contract. "Sign it," I said, "or get out and face the consequences." The silence that followed felt like it lasted forever. I could hear the clock ticking on the mantel, the distant sound of traffic from the street below. Serafina looked at Julian, some wordless communication passing between mother and son. Then with trembling hands, she reached for the pen. It took 20 minutes for them to sign everything witnessed by David and Marcus. Every page, every clause, every acknowledgement that they were voluntarily transferring the company they had built over 30 years to the niece they had tried so hard to crush. When it was done, Serafina looked like she had aged 20 years in one evening. "I need you to understand something," I said as Marcus escorted them to the elevator. "I didn't do this for revenge. I did it because you never gave me a choice. You could have loved me. You could have seen me as family. Instead, you saw me as less than, and you treated me accordingly. You created your own worst nightmare. You raised a woman who learned that the only person who would protect her was herself. Congratulations, you succeeded." The elevator doors closed on their broken expressions, and I stood there in my penthouse, surrounded by the evidence of their downfall, feeling nothing but an overwhelming sense of exhaustion. David put a hand on my shoulder. "Are you okay?" "I don't know," I admitted. "Ask me in a few months." The transformation of Blackwood Industries into Vance Legacy took 3 months of intense work. I restructured the entire company, fired executives who had been complicit in the fraudulent activities, and implemented new protocols for transparency and ethical business practices. I shifted our focus from maximizing profit at any cost to building sustainable developments that included affordable housing components. The New York business community watched with fascination as I dismantled the Blackwood empire and rebuilt it in my own image. Some called me ruthless, others called me a visionary. I didn't care about either label. I was too busy proving that you could be successful and ethical at the same time. Serafina and Julian moved to Connecticut 6 weeks after signing the papers. I heard through the grapevine that she had taken a position at a much smaller firm, working for someone else for the first time in 3 decades. Julian was in rehab, finally facing his addictions without his mother's money to enable them. I didn't follow up beyond those basic facts. They were no longer my problem. The tabloid that had published those photos got sued into oblivion by David's firm. We didn't win a huge settlement, the publication was nearly bankrupt already, but we got a public retraction and apology printed on the front page. That was enough. Tonight, 6 months after that confrontation in my penthouse, I'm standing on the balcony of that same apartment looking out over the city I've conquered. Harrison brought me a cup of tea a few minutes ago, and we chatted about building maintenance and the new art installation in the lobby. He's become something of a friend, this man who watched me grow from victim to victor. "You know," he said before leaving, "I've worked in this building for 30 years. I've seen a lot of wealthy people come and go, but I've never seen anyone who deserved their success more than you, Miss Vance." Now, alone with the city lights spread out before me like fallen stars, I think about that 7-year-old girl who walked into this building with nothing but a suitcase and a broken heart. I think about every humiliation, every cruel word, every moment I felt small and worthless. And I think about the woman I became, despite all of it, because of all of it. The view from here is beautiful. Harrison was right about that. But it's not beautiful because of the luxury or the height or the price tag. It's beautiful because I built it myself. Every window, every achievement, every moment of this life is mine earned through determination and refusing to accept the story other people wanted to write for me. My phone buzzes with the message from Sarah Chen, my friend from college whose startup I invested in all those years ago. She wants to grab dinner next week to discuss her company's expansion. Another message comes in from Marcus Silverton asking if I'm interested in partnering on a new development in Brooklyn, close to where I lived when I was struggling to make my first million. I respond to both, setting up meetings, moving forward, always forward. Because that's what I've learned. You can't change the past. You can't make people love you who are determined to see you as less than. All you can do is build a future that proves them wrong, not for their sake, but for yours. The tea Harrison made me is going cold in my hand, but the warmth inside me, the knowledge of my own worth that took so long to find, burns steady and bright. I am Arya Vance. I survived a childhood designed to break me. I built an empire from nothing. I took down the people who tried to destroy me, not with cruelty, but with the truth and consequences they had earned. And tomorrow I'll do what I always do. I'll wake up, I'll look at this city I've claimed as my own, and I'll build something new. Because that's what legacy really means. Not what you inherit, but what you create. Not the name you're born with, but the one you make for yourself. Not the family that raises you, but the person you become despite them. Here's what I want you to take away from my story. Your worth is not determined by how others treat you. Your value doesn't depend on approval from people who will never give it. And sometimes the greatest revenge is not destruction, but transformation. Becoming so undeniably successful that their cruelty becomes nothing more than proof of their own small-minded inability to see what was always in front of them. So tell me, have you ever had someone underestimate you? Have you ever turned that doubt into fuel for your own success? Drop a comment below and share your story. And if this resonated with you, if you've ever felt like you had to prove your worth to people who should have seen it all along, smash that like button and subscribe. Your support means everything, and I can't wait to hear about your own journey from underdog to unstoppable. Remember, the best view is always the one you build for yourself.